keep admitting people, but I think it's top of the hour, so I'm going to get started with our session. Welcome everyone to session, I lost its number, 3B. Session 3B here at the Texas Conference on Digital Libraries. I'm Shelley Barba. I use the she, her pronouns. I am the Digital Scholarship Librarian at Texas Tech University and chair of TCDL Planning Committee for this year. And I am just pleased as punch that you're here at our session this morning. This is actually the one I've been most excited about. And so it was the one I definitely was like, I'm going to be the one to be the moderator for that. But first, some housekeeping before we get started. The Texas Digital Library and the TCDL Planning Committee are dedicated to providing an experience for everyone that is free from all forms of harassment and inclusive of all people. We ask that everyone here today be considerate and respectful in speech and action, to attempt collaboration before conflict, to refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech, and be mindful of your environment and of your fellow participants. You can also view our code of conduct on the homepage of the conference. This session will run until approximately 11:50 and that's Central Time. Please feel free, though, to take breaks as you need them. I invite you to say hello in chat and let us know where you're joining from, and to share resources, make comments throughout today's talks. You're also encouraged to post your questions in the Q&A section, as I mentioned earlier, where you can vote on other questions that you'd like the speakers to answer. I'll be watching for your questions in the Q&A and share them with our speakers during the Q&A at the end of their talks. But you can ask that question at any time. And now we're going to go on with the show. I'm going to let the speakers introduce themselves and in their project. But our first one that I'm going to hand it over to is Heidi Winkler and her group.
Hello. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Hello, my name is Heidi Winkler. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Digital Services Librarian at Texas Tech University. I also have the privilege of serving as co-facilitator this year of the DLF Teach Working Group, and we'll learn more about that in a little bit. Today, we're going to talk about the DLF Teach Toolkit. We'll talk first about the last DLF Teach Toolkit, which was Volume 1 on digital library instruction. We'll also talk about the work that is going into the current toolkit on immersive pedagogy. Finally, we'll talk about the current toolkit that we've been working on and what it's been like putting that together, as well as the technologies that we've been using. And we'll end by talking about the future of the DLF Teach Toolkit. So first about DLF Teach. The Digital Library Federation Digital Library Pedagogy Working Group, which we lovingly call #DLF Teach, is a grassroots community of practice that we formed after the 2015 DLF Forum. We seek to empower digital library practitioners to see themselves as teachers and equip teaching librarians to engage learners in digital library technologies. In 2018, the group released a CFP for what they were calling at the time the DLF Teach Cookbook, which was looking to coordinate a collection of instructional resources that recognized and reflected the diversity of context and practice within the broad and still emerging field of digital library pedagogy. The cookbook formalizes materials common to the teaching archive, and the group cited the Library Instruction Cookbook and the Critical Library Pedagogy Handbook as models. The cookbook project was designed to gather resources for critical, concrete, practical digital library instruction, and to use the process itself as a form of professional development and community building. You are more than welcome to visit the created toolkit at dlfteach.pubpub.org/toolkit. It was published in September 2019 and edited by Erin Pappas, Liz Rodriguez, Chelsea Rao, and Yasmin Shorish. It also included a wide community of section editors, peer reviewers, and copy editors. The finished toolkit volume 1 had 20 lesson plans and session outlines from the hashtag DLF Teach community, which have been designed to be used as a jumping off point for instruction and to modify for local context. Topics included critical information literacy and digital publishing, data and maps, project development and management, text analysis and encoding, and digital exhibits and archives. We chose the PubPub platform not only because it's really fun to say, but also because it's been great to use. The Toolkit content is preserved in OSF, but the team wanted a user-friendly public-facing site. We found PubPub to be an open source collaborative publishing platform. We chose it because it didn't need to be hosted at one of the team's institutions. It handles DOIs very well. The interface is great for formatting and accommodating aspects of the publishing workflow, and it can handle custom URLs. We are also able to use PubPub for metrics and statistics, and the PubPub team was very accommodating and responsive. So if you are looking for a collaborative publishing project, we definitely recommend using PubPub. And now I will send it over to my colleague, Lorena.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lorena Gotro. I'm the Digital Programs Manager at Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Program, the U.S. Latino Digital Humanities Program there. It's a mouthful, sorry, and that's at the University of Houston. This toolkit started based on Immersive Pedagogy, a CLEAR inquiry group. And so a group of CLEAR postdoctoral fellows got together to create a bibliography about immersive pedagogy. And this really got us more interested on how to teach and learn with all different types of immersive pedagogy. And we were able to apply for a Clear Mellon micro grant in order to put on a symposium, which we called Immersive Pedagogy, a symposium on humanities teaching and learning with 3D, augmented, and virtual reality. And this was held at Carnegie Mellon University in June 2019. And it was also supported by CMU Libraries and Temple University. In addition to this, we were able to write an article. It's co-written by myself, Jessica Linker, who's here as well, Emma Slayton, and Alex Romer-Cullen. And you can find this on the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy. Next slide, please. So the Immersive Pedagogy Symposium had this theoretical foundation. We really wanted to start thinking about and getting our participants to think about decolonial theory. And so we were able to expose them to that theory in order to apply it to the ways in which they interact with these different technologies or the ways they teach it. It also pulled from feminism. We also wanted to think about accessibility and how this technology is or can be very limiting if you aren't already building that into your projects and the pedagogy. And we also, as a big umbrella, thought about the critical pedagogy that goes into using and employing these technologies. We had keynotes, Juliet Levy, who spoke about how not to be a replicant working toward a useful VR. And she really wanted to engage students, not just to explore a VR space, but to allow it to help form meaningful memories and to think through how to do research rather than just explore 3D spaces. And Angel David Nieves spoke on developing a social justice framework for immersive technologies in digital humanities. And both the keynotes are available. We recorded those and we'll drop the links in the chat as well. Okay, next slide, please. So we held, within the symposium, we held several workshops, and these are just a few examples to kind of show the theoretical leanings of how this developed and why this, it encouraged us to want to create the toolkit. Together with my colleague, Chris Young, I helped lead decolonial method and theory workshop in which we exposed the participants to decolonial theory and to thinking through how to understand 3D technologies or ready-made environments through decolonial thought. Jasmine Clark spoke on accessible immersive pedagogy, and she encouraged people to think outside of the box, not just expecting all the student participants to have access to the technology or to have visual ability to see or to experience the VR in the same way. And so she encouraged people to think about different ways in which to approach that. Alex Vermerkelin spoke on critical writing exercises for immersive tech. And so the symposium wasn't just about how to make tech or people who made the tech, but also how to employ ready-made projects that are already created and how to get students to engage with that. And then Jessica Linker and Chris Young spoke on collaboratively designing 3D VR experiences and how to get students involved in creating that. And there's an image of a 3D rendering of a biology lab that Jessica Linker created, and she actually got several students to help create this as well. And that was part of I guess it was a semester long. We can ask her in the Q&A. And I'm going to pass it to Alex.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Vermerkelin. I'm a digital scholarship coordinator at Temple University Libraries in the Loretta C. Duckworth Scholar Studio, where we help direct digital humanities and digital scholarship projects. We also have a VR lab, so a lot of my work with VR has been through exposure to the research going on at Temple. Today, I'll be talking about how we pivoted from the Immersive Pedagogy Symposium to the toolkit that we'll be talking about now. Couple kind of starting questions are why a toolkit on immersive pedagogy and why the DLF toolkit. So, we knew we wanted to publish lesson plans with the idea of kind of how to teach the teacher. And this felt particularly necessary because immersive technologies are very much emerging as having applications across a wide array of fields, but are still very difficult to use in a classroom setting. There's a lot of problems with the cost and the accessibility of XR tech. This is especially true, at a lot of institutions that don't even have a VR lab or VR headsets for rent. So because institutions lack the resources, most teachers and librarians are still just looking to figure out how to get started. Toolkit 1.0 came out around the time we were looking for a good place to publish and, offered a good model for open access, open source publishing. In many ways resembled, I think, the work coming out of the programming historian, but with a very different emphasis. Instead of on kind of guided tutorials, there is a much broader emphasis on curriculum and how to integrate these types of digital technologies into various classroom settings. So our team was looking for a library-oriented service and publication, really thinking through how libraries can support classroom pedagogy and, experiment in alternative forms of pedagogy. We really wanted applied critical lessons. And truthfully, there's very few publications out there that offer valuable standards for pedagogical materials. And that's true of almost every type of the, material that goes into the teaching archive, which can include tests and assessments, but also syllabi and individual exercises. Libraries also stand to benefit from taking advantage of this sort of emerging tech and playing a kind of crucial role in being a hub for distributing technology and ensuring teachers and researchers know how to use it. In our case, we were in the process of building a VR lab. And it became clear to me in a lot of the contexts we work in that, even this sort of very high-tech equipment that costs a lot of money is still very well suited to the kind of media rentals that libraries are used to doing. Next slide. So when we approached the DLF Toolkit, partly what we were excited about was some of the principles that had gone into Toolkit 1.0, but we also faced some new challenges and had to kind of rethink how we were going to do something. So we were prepared to announce the CFP when the pandemic started, and it was within a month or two of that there was a lot of conversation going around about CFPs that ignored the pandemic. So we decided to go with a kind of rolling submission and publication timeline to accommodate the types of difficulties people would be encountering over the following year. The CFP went out in the spring, and we were accepting submissions through the fall for various types of intents to contribute. And we've since been working with each author very hands-on to help them draft their lessons, send them out for peer review, and then do copy editing. We also were very concerned about the sustainability of the lessons, and this being Toolkit 2.0, it allowed us to look at the problems 1.0 was encountering as people were writing to say we'd like to update a lesson or two. And so it's something we've been very mindful of, in particular with immersive technology. Everything is changing quickly. And it feels important that the lessons can be adapted to new types of hardware and software. So it's something we're trying to integrate into the lesson plans as well as we can. When we invited submissions, we really sought submissions from all over the disciplines. We've gotten submissions from archaeology, art history, disability studies, library science, criminal justice, a lot of other fields. The call for papers, as Lorena mentioned, also emphasized various approaches to critical pedagogy, including decolonial frameworks and feminist frameworks, especially around issues of 3D curation of cultural heritage, a field that, as it stands now, is predominantly focused on Western cultural heritage. Similarly, we wanted to bring in critical perspectives on spatial fields like architecture. Next slide. So DLF Toolkit 1.0 was structured around 5 key sections: critical information literacy and digital publishing, data and maps, project development and management, text analysis and coding, and digital exhibits and archives. So as you can see, this runs the gamut of the kind of things you might do in digital pedagogy and digital scholarship. So Toolkit 2.0 is really zooming in on one broad but emerging field of media technology. Next slide. So this is a tentative outline for Toolkit 2.0, which should be coming out this summer, with maybe some publications rolling in later. You can see our editorial board. The table of contents is going to roughly look like it'll contain an introduction by the editorial board, as well as a kind of glossary or cheat sheet with information about all the types of hardware and software that the various lesson plans will introduce. We then have a wonderful introduction by Jasmine Clark on recommendations for accessible pedagogy with immersive technology that builds off of the workshop she did for us at the Symposium, and kind of provides a rubric for any of the lessons that we're offering to be adapted in the classroom for people who maybe aren't going to be able to use or feel comfortable using some of the hardware and software. Finally, the lesson plans are divided into 2 main sections, similar to how our Symposium was. Lesson plans that focus on how to create in 3D, and then lessons that focus on how to learn in 3D. So some of the examples of creating in 3D include 3D scanning, 3D modeling, 3D printing, as well as various forms of game making and creating game assets. The second half of the lesson plans are going to focus more on learning from 3D environments. So this includes things using phone-based headsets and 360 video for disability studies and criminal justice, teaching history of Che Guevara with VR worlds, that's what Juliette Levy's working on, or teaching archaeology and Native American studies in 3D. Next slide. As one example of a lesson that will be included, this is a project that I've worked on in my role as a digital scholarship coordinator with Dr. Ajima Oligari at the Temple University Assistant Professor of Criminal Justice, who has been working on teaching environmental influences on quality of life with 360 video. The lesson plan will kind of focus on her context of criminology, but I think will offer a lot of the guiding principles for anyone who wants to use 360 video in their classroom, including 360 cameras. Next slide. This is Ajima, and this is some of the hardware that she used in her project, including a phone-based headset, which is very affordable, and most students should be able to use, as well as a 360 camera that students could walk around with and record a space for observation later. Next slide. This is one of the areas around Temple that is undergoing gentrification and transformation that she looked at recording in 360 to have her students observe and try to learn how to observe various environmental impacts on quality of life. Next slide. And I'll hand it over to Heidi to talk about future iterations of the toolkit after 2.0.
Yes. So as Alex was saying, be on the lookout for at least the first parts of the DLF Teach Toolkit Volume 2 being published this summer. Also, in the coming months, be on the lookout for the CFP for DLF Teach Toolkit Volume 3, which we are going to focus on digital scholarship. And I know that that's something that's of interest to many people in this room. So I'm hoping to see a lot of Texas-based proposals for that one. And also just be looking for other plans for organizing events to help communities use the toolkits. And if you have any ideas about how to do that, please let us know. And that's it for us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you all. That was great. So I'm not seeing any questions yet in the chat or in the Q&A, but I really encourage all of our viewers, if you have one, to enter it in there. And I helped share the links that were posted in Zoom to also be in Whova, so that everyone can see both. And I'm so pleased that y'all had all these awesome links for us to share. And we have a comment from Laura Watt that is very interesting. Thank you all for that. I know you touched on it a little bit. So a question I have for y'all from me is just about your work during this past year with the pandemic and lockdowns and all these extra stress. Did y'all feel like there was an extra difficulty in this and trying to think about the future, or is that just me?
Yeah, I don't know if Alex wants to start. This is kind of, I always say this is kind of his baby, because I think he envisioned it and reached out to Heidi and others when we were still planning the symposium. So Alex, you want to start, and then Heidi and I can add.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been hard. I think the hardest part has just been, trying to be accommodating. I'm working on some other projects, publishing things in journals where the editors are completely unaccommodating. And in some ways that makes their life a lot easier. We're at the early stages of editing some lesson plans. Other lesson plans are near the final stage. So we're kind of doing everything at once, all the different stages of editing and keeping track of people at different stages. There's no kind of firm deadlines where we can say, okay, now we've moved on from that stage. So that's added a lot of work on our end. I think for all of the contributors, there's been some major problems, not just the ways that the pandemic has made all types of work life difficult, but also they haven't been able to test their lesson plans in physical classrooms with the hardware. So that's one of the reasons we're very much thinking about how can these lesson plans be updated in the coming years as they're actually implemented in more physical contexts. At the same time, the pandemic made it feel like this is exactly the kind of innovation we need to make distant learning a productive generative process. And, hopefully this will kind of lead to more discussions around preparing for future remote learning with better lesson plans and better technology.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question from Sandy. Will you all be updating existing content with any related immersive pedagogy elements? And what conversations have you all had about updating or sustaining this content over time?
Well, I can start. We've already started on updating some of the content from volume 1. We've had a few authors say like, oh, new things have come about. We want to work on that. So we've been working on putting together a workflow for how to let those authors do that. Obviously, we want this to be sustainable. We want this to be something that people can pick up at any time and doesn't feel outdated. So yes, we've definitely been working on creating those kinds of workflows. I think Lorena and Alex can probably speak more to what it would be to continue updating the immersive pedagogy content.
I think one of the great things about PubPub is that it's not a print publication. So updating it is a lot easier than having to create and print a new book, right? So that's one of the other reasons in which we thought like doing this with DLF Teach and using PubPub would be a great option. We're also already in conversations about holding a future second symposium because things change, because now we're going to have different people involved in or who have been developing these different technologies or different approaches and pedagogies, especially over the last year. Alex, anything else?
No, just that I think it's inevitable. We might have to sunset a lesson at some point, same way programming historian does this. And I think especially with some of this immersive tech, it's going to be really tough to keep updating it because a good example is Facebook's Oculus has gone through major transformations, including, the types of privacy that people are allowed using those devices. The applications for a lot of these hardwares are going to become less and less sustainable and still be around. So we've tried to have people use open source software where they can and to try to do versioning, but especially in this field, you end up having to use a lot of proprietary technology and it's constantly changing. And, especially when it comes to AR, it's a struggle right now to really make a standardized lesson plan for AR because it's changing so much and there's really not a great kind of standard technology out there yet for people to use, at least with the kind of glasses headset type thing.
Thank y'all so much. Santi says, thank you. I'd love to see those workflows if you're able to share. Community-led projects struggle with this and your lessons learned would benefit so many others. I agree with his comment there with that. Well, thank you all so much for your presentation. We're now going to switch over to our next presentation and start with our first speaker, Sarah Potvin.
Okay, can you see these slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Awesome. Everything's going great. All right, so thank you so much for having us today and for attending our talk. Thank you to the amazing TCDL organizers and the program committee that pulled this all together. And wow, I really miss seeing you all in Austin, but grateful to have this opportunity to learn from one another in this strange year. So Kathy, Tina, and I are librarians. We're based in 3 different units in the Texas A&M University libraries. Kathy is the graduate studies librarian, based in the Learning and Outreach group. Tina is a humanities and social sciences librarian and the liaison to several departments, including most relevant to this talk, performance studies. And I am the digital scholarship librarian based in the Office of Scholarly Communications, actually physically currently in the Office of Scholarly Communications. And we'll be talking today about a project that's really at the intersection of our 3 areas and our work in digital scholarship and humanities data curation, graduate studies, and performance studies. As Texas A&M researchers beaming to your computers from our own desks in College Station, it's important that we open by acknowledging that our university was built through dispossession of Indigenous peoples and expropriation of Indigenous land. So today we're examining web-based resources referenced in performance studies master's theses at Texas A&M University. We have focused on a small set of theses in an interdisciplinary department that has complex approaches towards evidence. And we've used a grounded theory approach for our analysis. We wanted to see whether students were using web-based resources, whether they were linking out to those resources, what kind of links were not functioning as they may have been when first included, and whether students were using tools like permalinks or citing paywalled or restricted content behind logins, or that required a special level of registration to access. And we were curious about whether, in addition to referencing fragile web-based evidence, these theses were using other techniques to document evidence within the text, like encapsulating it to guard against change or loss, and also whether loss was accelerated for certain kinds of web content. For example, government websites or articles available through JSTOR may be more persistent when YouTube videos uploaded by individuals perish. We're also interested in, you can see a lot of interests occurring here. We're also interested in the related potential for erasure of underrepresented or marginalized populations. And just a note on this, we've not yet settled on an approach to assessing the potential for heightened vulnerability or loss of web-based materials associated with underrepresented populations. But we are thinking currently of drawing on a formulation that was first suggested by Hope Olson, then built out by Marika Kiefor, I'm probably mispronounced that name, and described by Michelle Caswell, and which we learned about through comments on a draft that Santi circulated. So thank you, Santi, for pointing us to that. That is our sidebar. Our findings in this project inform our outreach to the Performance Studies Department and our plans to expand the analysis, interventions, and outreach to additional departments and the larger campus. And as TCDL attendees probably know, Texas A&M is a huge school with annual theses counts into the hundreds or the thousands. So this was an interesting opportunity to take a closer look at 27 master's theses that were produced in one of our smallest departments. So today, Tina, Kathy, and I will frame both quantitative and qualitative findings on link rot in the context of performance studies. And throughout, we're going to be asking and wondering, how do digital preservation and link rot affect the presentation of evidence in these works? And what can we do about it? And that last part, that eye towards generalizable or potentially automated approaches to guarding against rot in electronic theses, that will need your help. So please also consider this presentation to be an invitation to critique this work and to improve it, to extend the framework to your own collections of electronic theses and dissertations and graduate departments, and to work together on an approach to help graduate students and improve digital collections across our campuses, the state, and the region. So our presentation today includes 4 sections. I'll start by introducing some key points about link rot and ETDs. Questions about humanities data and citation practices are carried forward as Kathy takes up the performance studies section where she'll talk about interdisciplinarity and ephemerality. And then Tina's going to take us through the data, a corpus analysis that includes background on methodology, information about our findings, and thoughts about the dynamism of the web. And then I will bring us back to address potential interventions and repeat my invitation. So here we go. A few recent popular press articles have addressed the issue of link rot beautifully. So I want to open with a quotation from Jill Lepore from her 2015 New Yorker article on link rot. She writes, "The web dwells in a never-ending present. It is elementally ethereal, ephemeral, unstable, and unreliable. Sometimes when you try to visit a web page, what you see is an error message, page not found. This is known as link rot, and it's a drag, but it's better than the alternative. More often, you see an updated web page. Most likely, the original has been overwritten, or maybe the page has been moved, and something else is where it used to be. This is known as content drift, and it's more pernicious than the error message because it's impossible to tell that what you're seeing isn't what you went to look for. The overwriting, the erasure, or the moving of the original is invisible." Now, in the example I've included, it's not entirely invisible because you can see it was a citation from a thesis written and submitted in May 2015 to an article originally written in 2013 and marked as updated in 2016. But discerning what the updates are and what remains from the original, and looking at this original web page in the context of the dynamism of how the web page itself is presented to any given user, does fall into that area of uncertainty. So what Lepore observes as the distinction between obviously lost web-based work that's marked with the 404, the page not found, and changeable drifting resources, or really, again, anything presented on the dynamic web, is formalized by scholars like Martin Klein as link rot or content drift, and gathered together in the context of citations, especially under the broader term of reference rot. And yet references to highly ephemeral web-based materials are both ubiquitous and unavoidable. Many have noted that the ephemerality of web-based resources poses a threat to the integrity of the scholarly literature. And here's just one of those commentators on this problem, Jonathan Zittrain, Kendra Albert, and Larry Lessig in their influential work, Tracking Link Rot in Legal Citations. And their findings went on to inform the creation and launch of PermaCC, which is a web archiving and capture service based out of the Harvard Law School Library and targeted towards persistence in citations. Librarians, we have a particular interest and obligation in addressing the preservation issues raised by pervasive link rot within electronic theses and dissertations, which are both held in and published through libraries' collections as part of institutional research output, and serve as evidence of the scholarly preparedness and awareness of our graduate students trained in our university programs. In short, we should care about this issue both as stewards and as educators. Oops. And we have a quote here, so I want to give a little bit of context for this. As we know, as Zotero takes as its slogan, scholarship builds on the shoulders of giants, and some of the giants of ETD preservation include TDL's own luminaries at the University of North Texas Library. When we created our methodology for this study, we were influenced by practitioners, publications by Mark Phillips, Daniel Lemna, and this recent article by Mia Massicott and Kathleen Botter, who were at Concordia University writing on reference rot within their library ETD collection. So Massicott and Botter make a compelling case from the digital collections perspectives for libraries to intervene in ETD rot. They write, since theses and dissertations are original works born digital by virtue of mandatory deposit, a university's ETD program is effectively a digital publishing initiative, accompanied by a new universe of responsibility for its digital preservation. Since an ETD comprises a unique form of scholarly output produced by universities and simultaneously satisfies the parent institution's degree granting apparatus, as well as reflecting its academic stature on the international stage, and presence of reference rot in this body of literature is of particular concern and worthy of immediate attention. So that's the pitch. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy for the next section.
Hi, everyone. In order to scope our project, right, as we mentioned earlier, there are many ETDs published everywhere. We wanted to look exclusively at our corpus of 27 performance studies theses published from 2012 until 2020. Performance studies proved to be a particularly apt area to study because of the broad interdisciplinary methodologies and because of the highly ephemeral nature of the works being cited. Next slide. Performance studies theses look at performance in many different ways, from performances of identity to artistic performances to political performances. It draws on both humanities and social sciences scholarly methodologies, and the works analyzed often came from marginalized communities, international communities, and web documents that did not seem to have any sort of archiving mechanisms in place. So we saw a variety of issues, including paywalled material, broken links, and in the most troublesome cases, the materials referenced in the links just disappeared entirely. So within the area of performance studies, both the performance and the experience of the performance are important aspects that need to be considered, such that ephemerality is ever present in the idea of individual experience. So this presents a poignant issue in the cases of links and citations, where usability is not the only concern, but preservation is as well. Because you want to be able to experience the performance. A recent article by Cliff Lynch on link rot conceptualized the web-based works as performance, personalized and ephemeral and elusive. This also suggests the potential for performance studies to help guide approaches for capturing or even reconciling the loss of web materials. Now I will turn it over to Tina to talk about our data and our corpus analysis.
All right. So I'm going to talk about some of our findings and the methodology that we constructed. And then I'm going to show y'all some examples of what students have been doing, our graduate students, on their performance studies theses to try to capture some of this data. And this is prior to any intervention from us or anyone else. So next slide. All right, so we examined 27 master's theses from 2012 through 2020, and we excluded 2 that were under embargo. All right, next slide. And also there were 4 theses that we discovered that didn't have URLs at all. So those were actually excluded from this analysis because we really just wanted to look at what students were linking to. So our analysis eventually identified and tested 484 discrete linked resources and 21 theses submitted between 2012 and 2020. And of those, 26% of the links did not resolve, and about 74% of the links did resolve. So that was kind of a slightly significant amount. And I think you're going to be kind of interested in the examples in a minute. So we designed a coding analysis that included a number of different variables, including domain type. So if it's .gov, .org, .com, resource type, like what is the object they're linking to? Is it an article, newspaper, blog, social media? We also categorized like the language, if they were linking to Spanish, Russian, Ukrainian, Korean resources. And we also looked at factors like redirects, restricted access, password access, things like that. Because this was an exploratory analysis, we wanted to get a sense of what kinds of online resources were being cited and to look for any kinds of trends in the rate of deterioration. So among those 74% of links that did resolve, for example, 79 links demonstrated significant core content drift, sometimes rising to the level of the cited resource missing altogether. And then there were 234 links that were considered fully functional, but of those, 94 showed some type of change with the resource. So like going to the landing page and seeing like little changes through time that were very identifiable. So the problem goes beyond whether or not a link has resolved or if it's generating an error message, but essentially what is the URL linking to at this point in time and how it affects the author's work through time. And then all of this information will inform our recommendations and interventions. All right, next slide. So this is an example of a student's work, one of the theses we reviewed, and the next few examples will be from students' theses. And this shows how this student actually captured some of the information in their citation. So they put in the likes and the dislikes and the comments so that they could kind of preserve that. So I felt like that was really, some of these examples are really good, like forward thinking about these materials possibly just disappearing from the web. All right, next slide. This example is from a thesis that was looking at Tumblr. We had one thesis that just had tons and tons of Tumblr kind of links to it. And so this person is talking about this material that they are citing, but also in this citation below, they added some context to what it was about. And this is very important when the students are citing social media, because we did find that a lot of that material is very fleeting. It could disappear. It's very easy for an author in social media to delete that material. or password protected so you can't even see it as a viewer of this thesis or a reader. All right, next slide. This is an example of someone that cited a video on YouTube that's no longer available. And one thing that they did in their thesis was they transcribed some of the important parts of the material that they wanted. And they also translated it, which was great for the reader. So they captured this data in great detail in their thesis. And that actually worked in their favor because the video is no longer available. All right, next slide. This one was really interesting. This was a student that transcribed an interview, but they also had a nomenclature of how to pronounce the interview. So like they didn't include the recording, right? So they created a nomenclature so that people could understand when they're reading it, like how the interview was spoken. And this was something that was not digitized, we're assuming. And if they had like a recording or something, there's not really a place right now where you could put that with the thesis. All right, next slide. This one was also, I think, a YouTube video, and they actually took a screenshot of the video and just embedded it in the thesis. So I thought that was a good idea so that if the reader, they don't have to go looking for the YouTube video. All right. And then this one was where they captured a YouTube comment. So they just pasted it into their resource, into their reference, which I thought was a good idea. And that way, I think we all know that when we go to the comments in YouTube, there can be thousands of them. So how would you even be able to locate this one, or if the whole resource got deleted? This was a kind of a good thinking to put in just the whole comment. All right, next slide. This is an example that we saw in a lot of the links where students would try to put a URL in. And so there's a lot of variety there. There was not one way that they were being told to put in like DOIs or a stable URL. So even here, this was a good example of how in JSTOR, MLA, their citation style is suggesting the JSTOR stable link, but then their APA is suggesting the DOI, and they're Chicago. So I think all of us through this analysis realized how confusing it can be for students to add a permanent URL to something, because even the databases aren't giving them like possibly just the DOI. They're giving them multiple options. So a lot of times we did see a lot of proxy links for A&M used, which is problematic for outside readers who are happening upon this thesis. They can't access those links. So there's definitely needs to be some education about the importance of like a DOI that's more universal. All right, Sarah.
I'm back. Okay, so thank you, Tina. So now that we've described some of the dimensions of this issue, we are going to talk just briefly about some interventions that we can stage to try to mitigate against some of these problems going forward. And these are at the moment largely hypothetical, but we hope to implement some of these in the coming year and see how they fare. There are two parts to these interventions: raising awareness and changing behavior, and utilizing tools, designing tools to aid in preservation. So we've begun a collaboration through Leo Cardoso, the graduate director of the Performance Studies program, to reach out to students and to begin to reach out to faculty to talk about ways that they can minimize link rot in their work. And through this collaboration, we hope to jointly develop a set of what we want to either call best practices or good practices, baseline practices, to help guide behavior. And even in our, I'll say, even in our initial meeting with students in performance studies, graduate students in performance studies, simply raising awareness about the potential for reference rot and the rate of reference rot, and being able to share these examples and data has helped make a more compelling argument for attention to this issue. And we are also looking at the possibility of promoting the use of tools. So web archiving tools like PermaCC, something that is of special interest for performance studies, given the emphasis on AV materials, is the potential for using Conifer, formerly Web Recorder, as an alternative web archiving tool to capture these citations, which are really functioning as humanities data alongside these theses and dissertations. And eventually we are planning to expand our analysis to other departments and to the larger corpus of electronic theses and dissertations, and our outreach to other departments along with that. And when you see here, build network of practice among university library stewards, that is you. We are interested in building out a network of practice with you. And we're also really curious to see how we can build out on TDL's long investment and expertise in ETD stewardship and ETD professional communities. So we invite you to join us in collaboratively tackling these issues. And please contact us if you are interested in talking about tools or educational practices for graduate students to help address link rot, particularly concerning ephemeral materials in ETDs. Thank you so much. Here are email addresses and references, which I think you can also find on the website.
Thank you all so much. That is so interesting and fascinating. I'm sure for other people, not just myself. We are actually at the end of the time of our session, and so I understand if other people need to leave. I have noted though in the chat that you can ask questions of any of our presenters today, and actually through the whole conference, using Q&A asynchronously. So if you watch this presentation at a later time and have a question, please feel free to answer the question there. We will have access to our conference for the next half year. That'll be a great use of it. And I will also say that I linked relevant posters in our poster session to both of the topics today, touching on preservation and outreach and teaching that involves it all. So thank y'all so much. If you need to leave, that is fine, but we have one question that I'm going to read if our team from A&M can stay, from David Hubbard. He writes, thanks for the presentation. How many of the links, percentage-wise, are to their own performances or creative endeavors? It sounds like most of the links in these theses are to the works of others that they are analyzing and not their own, dance or music performance. This question may stem from my misunderstanding as to what they are doing in performance studies.
Tina, do you want to answer that given your work with Avalon and the undergraduates? And
yeah, so I would say 0, because all of the links that we analyzed were definitely to outside resources that were not their own. So if they did create something, they usually just embedded it in the thesis, because we're starting to try to use Avalon to remedy students' work. And we have done a little bit of that with the undergraduate theses, which are non-related to these theses. But we've had like a little test bed of putting a couple videos from undergraduate theses into Avalon, and we have a little space for that online. But these theses, probably too, just because of the age, and this all came about with the undergraduates recently in the past year or two. We haven't had any students that have come to us, as far as I know, and requested that, these graduate students. So the links we did look at were all just things that they referenced. And then if they did create something, it was usually embedded as an image or text within their theses.
Thank you. I hope that helps. Well, with that, it's 5 minutes until the hour. Please also remember if there's any other birds of a feather sessions, poster sessions, and other good sessions today. I look forward to seeing y'all all there. Everyone have a great time. Thank you.